All right, we will call this meeting of the Policy Agenda Committee to order. We have attendance.
Councilmember Bertina.
Here.
Councilmember Malik.
Here.
Councilmember Winston.
Here.
Councilmember Harrison. Councilmember Eyer.
And I think I did see Councilmember Eyer on as an attendee. So maybe, I know she won't be able to participate in the normal way, but if she wanted to speak, I think we could probably allow that, right?
Yeah.
Technically, she can speak during public comment.
All right. So then we'll call on her at the end.
Right.
All right. Could I get an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Councilmember Watson, seconded by Councilmember Malik. Any discussion? All in favor? The agenda is approved. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting? Councilmember Malik, seconded by Councilmember Watson. Was there any discussion of the past minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? It is approved. Seeing no unfinished business, we can move into new business. Our first item is an update from Dykema.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? I've had some audio issues. You can.
Yes,
Wonderful. I've been phoning in this afternoon for many virtual meetings. Well, wonderful. Yeah, just real quickly on the state side, I'll start there and then hand it over to Andy with our DC team to provide a federal update. You know, we're in the start of a new session. Things are a little slow getting started, not unusual. We are still waiting on committee assignments in the House, you know, from the November elections. You know, we have a change in power. Republicans now have the majority. So there are new committee assignments. We do know the full appropriations chair and minority vice chair, you know, a few appointments have been made, as well as on a special committee that's had some activity, and then Judiciary Committee chair, but otherwise, the vast majority of committee assignments have not been made, so we aren't seeing a lot of activity. Two bills that did move, both out of the special committee and then through the full House last week, dealt with two issues that were on the agenda potentially for lame duck and did not get addressed, but that's House Bill 4001 and House Bill 4002. They respectively provide amendments to the minimum wage law that the Supreme Court ruled would take effect next month, February 21st, and the earned sick time law that will also take effect on that date. And so those versions of those bills were passed. There was some, you know, it was bipartisan, you know, but not unanimous on that. Those bills have been sent to the Senate. The Senate's introduced their own versions, but has yet to act on those, and they're expected to be part of negotiations with the administration. So that's the early activity that we've seen. The Senate obviously was not up for elections. They have had just some minor changes with the departure of former Senator McDonald Rivet, who is now serving in Congress. But they also have really not had much activity other than adopting a resolution authorizing the Senate to sue the House for failing to present bills to the governor that were passed in the lame duck session. So right now it's a little quiet. We do have the governor's budget presentation scheduled for February 5th. So that's coming up next week. And very unusual, I think in my 35 plus years around the Capitol, I've never seen this happen, but the State of the State will come after the budget presentation that is scheduled for February 26th. So very unique to have that timing flipped. But for the most part, things are really in more of a holding pattern till committees are formed, but we expect activity to begin quite actively next month, early next month. And the committee assignments could come yet this week, if not very early next week. So again, starting in February, we're really expecting activity to pick up significantly. So with that, I will hand it over to my colleague Andy to provide the federal update.
Andrea, could I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Is it normal for committee assignments to take this long? This seems very out of the ordinary.
No, I mean, yes and no. It is typically not until the second or third week in January, so we're not too far out. 2 years ago, I think we pushed a little closer to the end of January. I mean, on occasion it happens where it's the end of the month, but usually the chairs have been named and you have some clarity. This is a little unique in that regard. New Speaker Hall is making all of those decisions himself and not using a committee on committee process, so that's part of that. Yeah, a little unique.
Thank you.
All right. On the federal side, maybe unlike the state, we are like drinking from a fire hose on the federal side here. As everyone is well aware, we have a new Republican majorities in both the House and the Senate, and President Trump got sworn in last week. The congressional action has been a little bit slow as people are sort of positioning for some big ticket items around tax reform and budget reconciliation later in the year. But that has not stopped the new administration from issuing a long list of executive orders that have, far-reaching impacts. I'm just going to sort of tick through a few of them very quickly. And then if you have specific questions about it, I'm happy to have a more in-depth conversation, but I don't want to take up too much time here. So right away on his swearing-in day and even following to the next day, President Trump signed a whole host of orders. One was essentially to freeze or pause all disbursements for funds that were awarded through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Over the course of the last couple of days, there's been some clarification so that some of the formula programs within the Department of Transportation have restarted in terms of being able to draw down dollars and things like that. But there is still both a lot of uncertainty and a lot of challenge in drawing down funds at the moment for anything that was funded through those two programs. Perhaps the two executive orders that have been getting the most attention and maybe have some of the far-reaching impacts. One is around, there were a series of immigration-related executive orders where the president declared a national emergency on immigration, which gives him some additional powers and authority to enact things. The president has stopped all asylum seekers. Refugee resettlement programs have been stopped. So I know that often in local communities participate in refugee resettlement programs. Those have been paused indefinitely. There were some others that got a lot more news attention around birthright citizenship and things like that. But the refugee resettlement program and the asylum seeking program may have the most direct impact to things that are on your agenda. And then the other order that has far-reaching impacts is the president's orders on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Essentially, anyone in the federal government who was part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion office and at a federal agency has been terminated. And all of those offices have been shuttered. And the executive order is very far-reaching in terms of questioning whether or not any government contractors have their own DEI programs and trying to find ways to essentially discourage nonprofit groups and other Fortune 500 companies. The executive order included an investigation of corporations and to what their programs are. And they do it all in the context of being merit-based and not in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which they have labeled as illegal discrimination. And so that executive order certainly has a lot of people very, very nervous about what that means for federal funding, because they don't want to abandon their own DEI initiatives, and they also don't want to jeopardize their federal funding. And all of this is less than a week old, so we don't have a real good take on it just yet. I suspect there are going to be a whole host of lawsuits and litigation that follow that will probably be fairly fast moving through the system because it has such a wide-ranging impact. There were also a number of executive orders as it relates to federal workforce. And so there's a hiring freeze right now, so they're not replacing any career folks that have vacant positions. They got rid of the federal telework flexibilities, and so they're in the process of figuring out how to bring everybody back into the office. There's been a change in this goes back to the prior Trump administration on classification of career officials. The higher level folks are now classified under what is called Schedule F, which typically those folks were protected from being hired and fired with change of administration and things like that. And the Schedule F designation now gives the president a lot more authority to terminate people or bring in his own people at those levels. And so, again, there will be a whole host of legal challenges to that one as well. The last thing I want to finish with is around just coming back to Congress and appropriations, where we currently have $1 million funding request pending in the FY25 appropriations bills for the Amtrak station. The funding is currently sort of all being negotiated. There is a continuing resolution in place that funds the government through March 14th. Most folks view March 14th as kind of the deadline to when Congress will act. And if I've given this update in the past, I'm sure I have said Congress typically does not act until they get right up tight to the deadline and have the pressure that comes with that deadline to force decisions and action. And I would be shocked if we come anywhere close to, avoiding that this time. I suspect we'll be passing bills on the 13th and 14th of March to deal with this. Where it gets complicated is that it will then result in an overlap of the FY26 process, because congressional offices sort of, for the most part, unless you're a part of the Appropriations Committee, your work is mostly done on FY25. Only the most senior members are negotiating those bills at this point. And so offices like Congresswoman Dingell and our 2 Michigan Senate offices, they're going to start taking project requests soon, and their deadlines will probably run into sometime into mid to late March that those deadlines will be in place, and that those deadlines are unlikely to move regardless of what happens in the FY25 process. And so we probably need to start having some discussions, not immediately today by any stretch, but soon, about what some of the city's priorities are for community project requests in FY26, so we can start to get those in order. Just as a quick aside on community projects, if you haven't participated in sort of the drafting of them in the past, because I know I worked pretty closely with John on those in the past, it's not necessarily the same level of specificity and detail that you would expect in a federal grant. It's more about identifying the dollar amount, where you expect the money to come from, and providing a description of what you're going to do with the money. If we're successful, then you will enter in sort of that next phase where I sort of equate it to, it's like applying for a grant that you know you're going to get. You just have to give them all the information. If you're successful in the appropriations process, then we'll hear from the agency, who will ask all of those questions and have all of the forms that you probably associate with federal grants. Let me stop there. I apologize for sort of talking for so long, but there's a lot going on here, so I'm happy to answer any questions. And if there's something that I skipped over that you have heard about and want clarification, please mention that also.
Thank you, Andy. Does anyone have any questions? For No, thanks. I think we appreciate that update. I know obviously there's been a lot of coverage of the EOs, and so I think we're probably fairly familiar with those, but certainly please continue to keep us informed about the process for budget requests, and obviously we'll continue to work with Congresswoman Beagle and Senator Peters and Flocken.
Yeah, and I would just say, if you are having anyone within the city is having interaction with federal agency at this point, and sort of there's a wall and no communication is taking place, we can try to work with you and the congressional office to help do that. There's been a lot of freezes and pauses and whatever the term du jour is within the federal agencies, but I know some of those things are very important and critical, and so we got to figure out how to break through pauses and such if need be. So if that situation arises, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions for Dykema? All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next item of new business, the 2025 policy agenda. There is an attachment on the agenda for folks who haven't reviewed it yet. Hopefully everyone has. I think we've all had it for a little while. I will turn things over to Mark.
Okay, so essentially, the staff made contact with all our boards and commissions to get their input, and we have a separate document for that. This particular document was intended to get council's priorities to be color-coded. Council member Eyer did respond to the communication and asked that we take a look perhaps at last year's agenda document and see what was accomplished versus what is yet to be, that hopes that we can move through this time. So I think Jonathan has maybe the document that she was referring to that perhaps Andrea might be able to help us weigh in about what was moved and what wasn't. So could you share that?
Yeah.
And maybe Councilmember Eyer could just give us the thumbs up if we're headed down the right track, and if not. So this is something, Andrea, that you provided after we met in an October meeting with the policy agenda, and it was color coded. Right. Okay. So she's got her hand raised. Because we're a little bit lost. So.
Hey, I actually was
Oops,
thinking of. Can you guys hear me?
Now we can.
Okay. So this doesn't look like the document that I was thinking of. The one that I was thinking of was, and maybe this is just in a different format. It does say 23, but the one that I think I had included it, didn't I, as a link in my email?
Yeah, you did link one.
Yeah, you did link just the overarching whole policy agenda, but I don't think that one was color coded.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is the same information but color coded.
Yeah, I think it's just in a different
Got it.
format.
Okay. Okay. I don't recall seeing this, so okay, great.
Yeah, this may have been more of an internal document that
Yeah,
John
that makes
used
sense.
kind of tracking wise
Right.
versus something that, yeah, so you may not have seen the color coded version.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that was my kind of remaining question as well is, as we were working through this, I will admit that I could have done this and still have not had the opportunity myself, but to kind of go back and look at, I know we've had like a spreadsheet of the items from last year, but then I also know, we've always kind of still had in the very background that kind of long list of the very, very ambitious list of policy agenda items that we've always kind of winnowed down into our actual agenda based on kind of what was realistic and actionable. And I guess I just wonder if we have looked back at that to see if anything has shifted. My guess would be as we move back to a period of divided government in Lansing, that anything that was not realistic last year does not suddenly become realistic this year on our agenda. But I think those were a couple of the things that I still had questions about. And then also acknowledging that, you know, we have some conversations coming up with our legislative delegation, and maybe just asking them like what their sense is of things that, you know, they might be able to work with Republican leadership on, given that it is a narrow majority. If there are things that they think are potentially workable as part of an agreement, if, you know, the Speaker Hall is having trouble with his right flank, maybe he needs a couple of Democratic votes here and there. And so maybe there are things that that they think might be actionable. But obviously, I think they are probably the ones who would be able to best tell us that dynamic when we talk to them.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And just so you know, I hadn't had a chance to cross-check from this agenda with, you know, these policy priorities with what we had, and I'm assuming staff haven't had an opportunity either with what's on the list, just to make sure nothing fell through the cracks, and in understanding as well that very clear interest by council to be very comprehensive, even and include those priorities that may not be strongly positioned this session, but still include those as it's important for messaging and just being very clear publicly on certain items that are priorities, regardless of what their likelihood is in the legislature. So, yeah, that most definitely hasn't been lost as we've done the review. And I think, you know, we're happy to do a double check on that list to make sure nothing was overlooked that should carry over, and add that on if there was. But I think if any of you had a chance to just kind of quickly look at that list, most of it's pretty familiar, so I don't think we missed any, you know, but we'll do that double check and appreciate that flag.
The only other question I maybe had for all of us is, you know, and maybe this is a question for you, Andrea. Given the new dynamic in Lansing, there's also the likelihood that there may be times when the city is actively opposing something. And while this is kind of an aspirational agenda, I wonder if it is helpful to include some of those extra bullet points, knowing that there might be things that we would want you to submit a card against, because it's very clear what our priorities are. Is that helpful guidance to you, or is that something that you're kind of in regular communication with Marty and staff about, knowing where kind of the city stands?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly helpful, and I wouldn't discourage including that as well. But there's a lot, you know, this document provides some really valuable guidance, but there's always things that come up that don't quite fit in any, you know, and so there is that constant communication as well. But I think it's really helpful, especially at times. Decisions, there's not a lot of notice, and decisions need to be made quickly about engagement and what that looks like. So I think as much guidance as you're able to provide, both what you're supportive and advocating for, as well as what you would be opposed to, is really valuable as we move forward. And again, things are a little quiet now, but they're going to become incredibly active, and that clarity only benefits us.
The other sub questions.
Yeah. Oh, just one thing on the color coded document from the one dated January 9th that took information from staff and had the color coded feedback from Dykema. There was a portion for the feedback from the Planning Commission, and it was, you know, there are two items I think were marked in red, but one of them, there was a question about striking inclusionary zoning. and I think you had commented sort of need more info on that one. And I double checked with Councilmember Dish, who's the planning liaison, and Jennifer Hall from the Housing Commission. And the recommendation I think they had was to essentially leave inclusionary zoning out of what we're advocating for, because it's a case-by-case situation with different localities, and in places it can kind of discourage development of housing at all levels. So I think from what my understanding is, we're going to have a leaner policy document that we're conveying to legislators. So that might not have been on it anywhere, but it wasn't necessarily advocating getting rid of inclusionary zoning. It was advocating not continuing to have that as one of our priorities.
That makes much more sense. So thanks for that follow-up.
Yeah. Oh, and then I just sorry, one other thing. In the documents that we have, we don't have any sort of thoughts on appropriations, I guess. And I think it was much clearer when we had Democratic control, full Democratic control in the House, that we would want a wish list. But one of the items I was thinking about in the Republican control is road funding. And I know in our past document, we'd had something like road funding and the amount, any amount. I'm wondering if we think there's going to be any movement on the local road funding plan from Matt Hall, and if we didn't want to specify something, or, you know, even if we obviously don't want them to take away from other valuable programs to do it, but if there is a plan going through how the city of Ann Arbor make sure we're part of it, I guess, or we're getting a fair share, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think in the document, the original kind of priorities that we received from the city for this session, you know, there was a reference around local road funding, and we did flag that because we do expect, I mean, that's a priority for the Speaker Hall. It's been an issue the governor, since her first election, campaigned on. You know, where they land at the end of the day, unclear, but I think there's a real opportunity in that, in those deliberations to increase funding for local roads, and something the speakers kind of made specific mention of. So I do think there's an opportunity there, and so that was one of the things we flagged. I think we'll need to think a little bit more like and I don't believe we've received that assessment from the city yet on what funding priorities there may be, a lot of detail on that, and we'll continue those conversations. But there's still an opportunity. It's a little different process, and we're trying to understand that dynamic under Speaker Hall's leadership. But he hasn't said no. I think he wants a lot of transparency around those enhancement grants, direct appropriations, but he's also looking to have a lot of money existing money in the budget directed to support roads. And so that's going to pull away, even when we, you know, with projections showing a surplus going into, you know, with what carried over from excess surplus dollars in the current fiscal year, along with increased projected revenues in the upcoming fiscal year that will begin that budget work on. There are substantial dollars. I think it's about $1.7 billion right now. But again, the speaker's wanting to use a lot of that, not all, but a lot, to direct towards road funding investments. And so we just, you know, a lot of dynamics at play, but there's certainly resources, and he hasn't said no. And I think a lot of conversations to be had to understand what all those opportunities might be for the city.
Are there other general funding areas that the Republicans tend to like or be more generous with, even to Democratic areas than they're, I don't know, that we might not expect? I don't know, I'm thinking maybe things like fire, or maybe even around law enforcement or something, but are there areas where Ann Arbor could have an event be successful that we wouldn't expect? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there are areas, you know, emergency response is something that's always generally been supported both sides of the aisle. You know, I think folks understand those needs in communities. I think housing is one of those areas where you're likely to continue to see strong bipartisan support for state investment. There's going to be a lot of discussion around economic incentives. You know, the Senate's been pushing and continues to push more community investments as part of that. And you know, that can look like a lot of different things, but it's not clear exactly how that will be received in the House and even by the administration. I think there's that conversation's changed a lot, so that really opens up a lot of opportunity in communities. But again, it's early in this session. Things have been really quiet because we don't even have committee appointments. I think it really helps when we could start having conversations with, you know, appropriations chairs and subcommittee chairs and policy committee, and just understand more clearly where those opportunities lie. But I think there will be. I don't think we should assume there aren't any. And it might just be a little bit different process this session, given the dynamic.
Well, thanks so much, Andrea. I know that's why Dykema has proved very valuable in finding those areas, so we appreciate that.
Any other questions? Marty, what are you thinking in terms of, doesn't seem like we're ready to approve anything to send along. Is this something you think we should try to have a deadline by which we've gotten everything back to all of you so that we are on track to approve this at our next meeting?
Right, so we don't meet in February. So
okay.
If we could get it maybe back by the end of February, we could have it at the March meeting.
Okay. And I guess my only other caveat there would be potentially, you know, if Andrea, you're starting to see a lot of movement at the state level and feel like we need to get this approved more quickly, maybe we need to call a special meeting to get this onto council's agenda and get it formally approved. And so I guess just keep us informed if we need to move on a quicker timeline than that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, you know, I think Andy alluded to this at the federal level. At the state level, probably where the greater time sensitivity may occur, you know, in waiting on this document to be finalized, might be more on the funding request, because we don't want to be waiting. I prefer not to be waiting into March till we know what, you know, I think a little more clarity earlier on, just even broadly what those are to understand the opportunity. But that process moves quickly. No reason they aren't going to try and have a budget completed in June. And so things move very quickly. And with the legislative recess, the House and Senate aren't following the same schedule. So now we have a stretch over 3 weeks. It's going to make things really kind of complicated and I feel like quite condensed on the budget, especially reporting first House budgets, which I realize all these, you know, enhancement grant requests and things like that aren't necessarily in there, but you want to be part of those conversations early on. And so that's the area where I have the greatest concern. I think as policy's coming up, there's going to be some education in the committees that sometimes it takes a slow roll, or at least we can get feedback to know how the city wants to engage. I feel like we'll have enough time and probably aren't going to be surprised with a lot of brand new issues right away, but on the budget request side, that's where I feel like we may need a little clarity sooner than later on that, just so we're not starting off behind in that process. It's going to be, I think, a little clunky and condensed and slow and kind of take a little bit of a weird process this year just because of the circumstances.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we probably still have a bunch of capital things that we've asked for previously that maybe weren't funded last year. That might be a good starting point. I think we can check if those are still needs that we have locally or things that we can shift around, but we can certainly get to work on that.
Yeah, and
I've had some communication with Senator Peters' office, and they gave me some recommendations, so I'm in the middle of itemizing those and that I can share them with what I was able to learn in those conversations. They kind of pointed me in specific directions that they thought would gain traction.
Well, and I'm thinking at the state level also for those state budget appropriation requests. And, I know that there's not nearly as much money as last time when, you know, money was getting handed out to cities all over the state, but if there are opportunities, we should look at them. Okay. Anything else we need from on this item, Marty?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Then we will move on to item 3, our legislative breakfast.
So again, Councilmember Eyer sent out her email over late Friday and made a recommendation about what we focus on at the meeting. I, not being a part of the previous meeting, wasn't exactly sure logistically how the meeting unfolded, and so was looking at. Jonathan and I were really looking for your input on how you see the meeting progressing and how we can support that effort.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if Jen wants to chime in again if we can let that happen, but, you know, previously I think we have had more of kind of a presentation to our legislators about our agenda. Jen, you know, Jen and I talked about this a little bit. I think we think it could be helpful, given the new dynamics, to have more of kind of a conversation around our existing agenda or our past agenda, and what folks think are the areas we could focus on and maybe see more success. If there are, you know, key inroads with Republican leadership or things that they think might get negotiated out as things move forward. And so, you know, where before I think John was kind of presenting our agenda to folks, I think maybe a format that's a little bit more conversational and allows for them to provide us with some feedback based on their expertise, particularly now that, you know, a relatively young delegation has had a session under them. And so, so the fact that they could maybe give us a little bit more guidance, and, you know, particularly with Representative Conlon serving in Democratic leadership now, whether or not she has any insight. So I think all of those things could be really helpful to us as we finalize our own agenda.
Do we want to also?
Of course.
The only question I had, I guess, because we're sort of in draft form on the policy, and we want to have like a specific handout we're given, because last time we kind of left them with a nice thing list, and they actually, we did get feedback that they appreciated it because that was a time when they were able to move things pretty quickly, so they were glad to have that. But I think this time, maybe just like a shorter, just an agenda of kind of discussion topics. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I certainly think that's helpful. I think what we would probably do, I think there's still an expectation that we would hand them that nice thick book, but it might be something, you know, we or Andrea or somebody is delivering to their offices rather than at this breakfast. And so, so yeah, I think that will still be coming and we can set that expectation with them. But yeah, something maybe a little briefer around, you know, some of the outstanding things that maybe we think, or based on Andrea's expertise, that might be things that we should talk about as top priorities or impending items that might come up quickly.
I was going to say almost exactly.
Okay.
So we probably should give them something in writing, and
yeah,
and I think John might have given them like a preview of the discussion so that they're not completely out of the blue either.
yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, it makes sense to follow up and provide kind of the final policy document and funding request once that is completed, and you know, we're able to do that, and we're, you know, happy to support that. But I do think it might, for the discussion when they join the breakfast, be helpful to share a draft copy that you just asked that they keep confidential for that discussion, and give them a chance to have some review, and so they're a little more prepared for what all the conversation will be and to provide feedback on some of those specific items where they see opportunity in this legislature.
Jen?
Yeah, so I guess if I may, I think the way to go here might be to take the old document as our starting point, add in the new things, and council members, we all need to give feedback on what of these issues from the boards and commissions, if you haven't already, we want to, are high priorities for us, and then let staff kind of meld those two things, and that can be the starting point for our discussion, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It makes a lot of sense.
sounds like a plan. When will staff need final feedback from us to put something like that together for that morning? Because it's coming up pretty quickly.
Yeah, yes, the breakfast. So I would like to put something together and share a draft of it with you all before we would share it at the breakfast. So if you could get it to us, first thing Thursday morning, so that I could cycle it back to you all, that would be ideal.
And I was hoping to confirm, so the goal is to not have, a formal presentation, but instead have it be more conversational and provide an agenda that includes discussion topics. Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
All right. I don't see any other hands on this one, so do we have any upcoming business? Not seeing any right now. Then we will move on to public comment. I know that we have Councilmember Eyer in the room, but also another member of the public, and so now would be your opportunity to provide public comment. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to participate. Councilmember Eyer.
Just a quick thank you for Travis for handling this in my absence. I'm sorry I couldn't be there today, and I think we've got a good plan going forward. And Marty, I'll follow up with you on the format, some thoughts I have for the format for that meeting.
Okay.
With the legislators. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Yep.
Thanks. Seeing no other hands and no one in the room, we will close public comment. And covering everything on the agenda, we stand adjourned. We don't actually need a motion. If
Power move.
But is there a motion?
So moved.
Second, all in favor? We stand adjourned.